Mitch, thank you for coming.
Yeah, sure. It's my pleasure.
It's pleasure. I mean, your credit list is so impressive. I mean, you look through this list and you realize, okay, there are so many movies you grew up. There are so many movies that you're such a big fan of. I'm on these credits, 15 movies with Steven Spielberg, which is, again, your longtime collaborator.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much I want to ask you. But I remember when I first met you, and you were telling about the way you work. It has impressed me so much. I told you that if I were building my camera operator's career, I would want to be like you. So, can you tell me more about how did you start your career? When did it all start?
Yeah, well, it's it's funny because you mentioned my credits, and there are a lot of credits, and I don't really realize how long I've been doing this until someone like you mentions that, because it just seems all like yesterday to me. But even my start in the business seems like just yesterday. But I went to film school. Didn't like film school at all, but was very fortunate because I didn't like my last 2 years I was at the University of Texas at Austin, and because I didn't like the film program there, I hung out in the art department, and I was really fortunate. There was a great still photographer named Gary Winogrand, who I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he was well known. He's the famous photographer. He's passed away early, unfortunately, but mainly his work was in the 70s and 80s. A lot of street photography of the Robert Frank, Lee Friedlander style generation. Anyway, I learned probably more from Gary about visual storytelling than I ever did in film school. But how to use the camera and the four lines of the frame, how to balance form and content. Gary was a great teacher because he was a really gruff New Yorker who had no hesitancy to say that photograph is shit. That's great. That's shit, But he would always have reasons to back it up. And I learned a tremendous amount from him. And I always will be grateful that I had those 2 years to spend with him. And then, I graduated school and really had no idea how to get into the business or how to make a living at it, and thought I had wasted my time, and I sort of floundered around. I painted little ceramic gingerbread houses, and as a janitor in the art school that my girlfriend, now wife, was attending, but it was sort of fate. I mean, I had known from junior high school that I wanted to make movies. I didn't really know what or how, but I knew that I loved going to the movies, and I knew I wanted to be involved with them. And it seemed almost like fate that while I'm sort of floundering around in the Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area, that a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend heard that Francis Coppola was coming back from the Philippines after shooting Apocalypse Now, and that he was setting up a post-production facility, and they were looking for people. So I went in, applied for a job there, and immediately got hired. And my first day of work in the film business was actually working all that night. So I should have realized then that it was going to be a different type of career. But I started working at Zoetrope Studios as a post-production PA. Hauling moviolas and flatbed editors up 3 flights of stairs, and I used to project the rough cuts for the editors, because it was a double system projection system, and you had to get the changeovers right. And I was the projectionist that the editors liked the most. So I screened every possible version of Apocalypse Now. I got to screen and watch. It was great. And I learned a tremendous amount, being at Zoetrope, and I'm still in touch with a lot of the friends I made those early years at Zoetrope Studios. One of the things that was my job as a PA was to inventory all the equipment. Moviolas, split reels, splicers. But Francis bought 2 cameras for Apocalypse Now. These Technovision cameras. I don't know if you're familiar with Technovision.
I've had, yeah.
Henry Kroshiki and, Vittorio would only shoot with the Technovision lenses. So they had to modify, which were Cook lenses that they modified with different mounts, but they had a very deep back focus. So they had to modify. They had a BNCR and an Arri BL that they modified the shutter. That was what a Technovision camera was. So Francis had purchased 2 of them, and when all the equipment came back from the Philippines, it was my job to inventory them, to stick stickers on, to put them, store them in their...
Why did he purchase them?
Why did Francis purchase them? Because he hated renting anything.
Okay.
He wanted to own everything that...
That's kind of like me.
Yeah. I mean, that's why he bought the studio here in Hollywood eventually, So, he had a post-production facility and he owned all the moviolas and flatbeds. And, he didn't want to rent cameras. And it made sense. I mean, if you have somebody to take care of them and a place to store them, why not? And can afford it, why not buy them?
Exactly.
So the equipment came back to San Francisco. I inventoried it. I didn't think much about it until, maybe a year later when they wanted to do additional photography on the Black Stallion. And then later, Apocalypse Now. Francis said, you need to, use the cameras, and the camera assistants came in. And I was the only one that knew where everything was. I didn't know what anything was, but I knew where it was. And the camera assistant said, well, why don't you just come with us and, be a, camera PA on the set. So the first day I ever spent on a set, because Zoetrope Studios was post-production only until then, was on the Black Stallion. And I don't know if you're familiar with the film, but it's the scene where the Kelly Reno, who's the kid that, has the horse, rides the Black Stallion for the first time through the surface. It's a great scene.
Yeah.
They shot mainly in Sardinia, I think. And, but this scene we shot up in the coast in Oregon. And I'll never forget that first day on the set, that it was just, it was being, an editorial and being in a dark room and working pretty much by yourself, to being, in this beautiful location on the coast of Oregon, and there's, 100 horses and horse trainers and Titan cranes and hair and makeup. I mean, it's just, there's such a hubbub of activity, and you realize this is the origin of the moment of, the creation of a film. And, I fell in love. I knew that I wanted to be on the set. I knew I wanted to work with cameras. And so I started, when Francis bought the studio in Los Angeles, Hollywood General, to do One from the Heart, he asked me if I would run the camera department for the studio. And I said, of course, yes. And it was really more of a glorified PA position, but I learned, working with Vittorio Storaro and the crew on that film, I learned a lot. Wim Wenders was a director at doing a film at Zoetrope called Hammett. Not one of Wim's best films, but and the development of the project just took a long time, and he sort of got frustrated and he decided in the meantime he was going to make a movie with Nick Ray, who he was friends with and was an American Friend. And so he asked Francis if he could use the cameras, and Francis said, yes, you can use the cameras, but you have to take Mitch with you. And they were shooting in New York. So, and we would shoot for a little bit, and then, Nick was sick, he was dying. And so, he ended up having to go back to the hospital. We'd go on a hiatus, everything went back to LA. And then a few months later, we'd go back and shoot some more. And this went on quite a few times. And each time we reorganized and started shooting, the the crew would sort of shift. And, again, I went from being sort of like a camera PA responsible for the equipment to being a second assistant to I think the last time we started shooting, the DP was Ed Lockman, who is it's where I first met Ed, dear friend of mine now. We still, stay in touch, of course. But the last time we started shooting that, it's called Lightning Over Water, there was no camera assistant. And Ed said, well, why don't you pull focus? And I was like terrified. I had never done it before. But I did one shot and said, okay, I think I can do this. And Ed said, you're great. You're fantastic. And he said, anytime you decide to move to New York, I can use you, as a camera assistant.
And it was before monitors and stuff.
So it was like hand on the wheel. Yeah. Yes.
Wild stuff.
Yes, you stood right by the camera and the operator, and it's a totally different style of pulling focus now. It was just he put marks down and measure things out.
I can see why you were nervous.
Oh yeah, it was terrifying. We finished One from the Heart, and I was ready to leave Zoetrope, ready to leave Los Angeles. It was a crazy experience. One from the Heart was a whole nother story, but I'll say that it was probably the last of, the big days of excess Hollywood, big parties every Friday night, and spending money crazily. And it was sort of, as much fun as it was also really exhausting, and I decided I needed to try something else. And so moved to New York. My wife is from New Jersey, so we moved to New York, and I was there for 10 years. And I started working with Ed, doing everything: commercials, documentaries, features. We did Desperately Seeking Susan, and Susan Sodelman, who was the director of Desperately Seeking Susan, was doing her next film, which was called Making Mr. Right. And Ed said to me, because Ed normally operated his own projects, except if they were union and he needed to hire an operator. And on Making Mr. Right, he said, would you like to operate the A camera? And of course I said yes, but I was completely terrified. Because I had never done anything. I hadn't operated second unit. I hadn't operated B camera. I had the only thing I'd operated were gray cards and slates. I mean, that was it. So all of a sudden I'm being thrust into, by my choice, of course, but a very big budgeted Hollywood movie as the A camera operator. I was more terrified of that than I was the first time I pulled focus. And I don't think I slept for weeks before we started shooting. But I'll never forget, the very first time, day one of shooting on that movie, sitting on the dolly, putting my eye to the eyepiece. That's when we still looked in the eyepiece as well. And feeling comfortable and realizing that I understand what the four lines of the frame are, that difference of, looking at this with your eye and then looking through an eyepiece and understanding how that translation works, what the lenses do and what the frame means. And it's maybe it's an intuitive response or instinctual understanding, but I knew I was going to be good at being a camera operator. Ed, because he operated most of the things, himself, he was a little bit of a hard taskmaster because I had never, and he would, after every take would come screaming at me like, nah.
Giving you a hard time, yeah.
Yeah. And, so I always say, to Ed that I'm forever grateful he gave me the opportunity to move up, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive him the way he treated me. But I love it. And he's
what he was complaining
talented.
about.
Oh, I don't know. Headroom. I can't even remember. Everyone has their own particular.
Did it motivate you to be better? Because I remember when I was starting out, you show something you shoot to someone and everyone says, oh, it's cool, it's cool. And I had one friend who always said, looks like shit, you need to do better. And it pissed me off always, but I always wanted to make something so good. So one day he's going to say, okay, this is good. And kind of was motivating me. So in a way, probably that was it.
Well, the thing is, after I was finished the movie, making Mr. Right, the thing that I realized is that the effect of Ed being so critical all the time, it really destroyed my confidence. Mm-hmm. And as a camera operator, and I've said this oftentimes, is that probably the most important tool you have as a camera operator is confidence. When you get behind the lens and you sit behind a camera and you're operating, no matter how many instructions you've been given by the director or the DP, once you start rolling, it's you making those decisions 24 frames a second. And you have to be confident. You have to say, there's no one else that can do what I'm doing right now better than I can. And after I left One from the Heart, my confidence was shot, and I was pretty much a shattered camera operator, I would say. And you can't work like that. So it wasn't, it wasn't like the things that Ed told me I remember and helped me improve me. What it did was it made me realize how important confidence is to what you do. Even if it's confidence that you make up in your own head, it's important. When you step on the set, when you get on the camera, you have to be confident. And so, a DP who was a friend of mine, Francis Kinney, hired me for another job, and he was great. And I sort of gained my confidence back, as a camera operator. But I will say something that might be interesting to your viewers in that, so I did Making Mr. Right, and then pretty much right after that, I did Mate One, which was a film, John Sayles' film with Haskell Wexler they shot. And, I always knew the transition from being a camera assistant to operator is a difficult transition. To move up is always hard. But I did these two big movies sort of almost back to back, and I thought, well, that wasn't that hard. I could make this transition. I've made it. I just did two big movies. Mm-hmm. And after those two movies, I didn't work again as a camera operator for a complete year. Like 365 days, I was offered jobs as a camera assistant, but I didn't want to take them because I was committed. Once you move up, you need to stick with it.
So and you have to start rejecting jobs and declare that you don't.
Yeah, I'm only going to be a camera operator. And it took a full year for me to get another job. That was terrifying.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But, I was young and I, didn't have a family.
The big shit, because everyone knows you as first AC or the contacts or whatever. And it's really hard to change their mind in terms of thinking who you are on set.
Exactly. Plus, also, I had pretty much worked exclusively with Ed for all those years in New York. And when I moved up to operator, Ed still continued to do his other projects, independent projects that he operated himself. And I realized I didn't know anybody else. I knew Ed. Mm-hmm. And as much as I loved working with Ed, it's very important to all you young cinematographers or camera operators that to network as much as you can. It's a networking business. Go out and meet people, work with as many people as you can. I learned that lesson the hard way.
So how did being first AC camera assistant influenced your camera operating? Even today, like when you're operating, do you feel like if you didn't have experience being first AC, you wouldn't know that or that, perspective or something?
Yeah, I think it's good that that you do all the crafts. Mm-hmm. I think it was great that I was a film loader, and it was great that I was a second assistant, and it was great that I was a first assistant before I became a camera operator because, first of all, you know what these people do and you respect their jobs and you know that their job is just as important as anybody else's job on the film set and that critical to the process of making movies. So you understanding what they do and respecting what they do helps the whole process. So that's one. And then the other thing, in terms of just the storytelling, it's there's storytelling that happens with focus, and if you have an assistant maybe that isn't quite aware of that, and it's all about marks, and let's say there's a focus shift that's done either abruptly or at the wrong time. My experience as a camera assistant and my experience as an operator, I'll talk to them and say, you got to be much more graceful with that focus pull, and do it on their head turn to motivate the focus pull, or do it on this line because it means something. And so there is an art to pulling focus. It's not just about keeping the actor sharp, but about being part of the storytelling. And also, I have a great relationship with the second assistants because they're just practically they're doing the slate and keeping track of what it was film. Now it's different with digital, but they do so much on the set behind the scenes, but they're also the people that when you're filming are not necessarily, they're watching, and they sort of see the whole picture. And I've had a lot of conversations with second assistants where they'll say, Mitch, what happens if you would try this or do this, or did you see that? And I would say, no, I didn't see that. I really appreciate that. Thank you. They're another great asset on the set because they have a perspective of what's going on that the focus puller, first assistant, or the operator or the DP don't have, because we're so busy in the intricacies of our specific job.
When you camera operate, you're the one who talks to AC. So you in between DP and AC, right? If you need to do something.
Yeah.
Is that how it is usually?
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a weird situation these days because ACs now have their monitor and their remote focus and their measuring devices, electronic measuring devices. And they, if this is the scene right here and the camera's right there, they'll be off as far away as they can be. They're in the corner where they can concentrate. No one bothers them. And so the relationship between an operator and AC is not the same as it used to be when we had our hands on the camera.
To each other.
Yeah. I don't like to wear headsets, but if I do wear a headset, I will only wear it with the dolly grip and the camera in the first AC. I never wear it with the DP.
So you ask to make a separate channel for you, yeah?
Yeah. And so then I'll communicate with the camera assistant, mainly to let them know what I'm doing, because sometimes if they're not always by the camera, they'll get surprised by me doing something.
So you have on the same channel DP talking to you. Okay.
Yeah. I've been
whispering into you.
I've been asked so many times, and I won't do it because,
And how do they take it?
Some of them not so well, but some of them understand completely. I mean, when you're operating the camera, you really have to get into a zone, and it has to be a really instinctual response to what you're seeing through the lens, and responding to the actors who are not always hitting marks and their performance. And you need to have this immediate communication with the dolly grip. But if you have somebody whispering in your ear in the middle of the take to tilt up or pan left to right, it's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't do it.
And if he wants to make suggestions
afterwards, I'm happy to talk with him, but not in the middle of the take.
Come to me and talk to me.
That's happened before. We've been in like this, this cramped, minivan, on stage shooting the scene, and the DP's out at their DIT station, and I hear him screaming and yelling in the headset, and I just ignore it. And he says, if you don't, answer me, I'm gonna have to come in and talk to you. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. Come on in.
Oh, and okay, when you're on the same channel with dolly grip, yeah. Do you talk during the take, or
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes.
It depends, if it's a really complicated shot, like if we're on a crane and there's, it's a telescoping crane. And so there's a man on the bucket, there's a man on the chassis, there's a man on the arm, and there's, and there's me, and there's the art of you doing a crane is that everyone has to be in sync. If the camera's telescoping and swinging and dropping, if it doesn't all stop at the same time, you see that little jiggle or that little false move. So sometimes it's as simple as counting down. Okay, ready and stop. Right.
I find that dolly grip is kind of camera operating as well. It has to be the sensibility,
absolutely,
to where to start move, where to push it down, push it up.
It's not about hitting marks. It's about the grace of moving the camera, and they have to be totally in tune with the actors
and reaction to whatever happens, because sometimes it doesn't happen the way that it was rehearsed. Yes,
I love dolly grips to have a monitor.
Yeah, same for me. Yeah, I love it. I always insist so they see what I'm seeing.
Right. Yeah, and I'm really, really particular about dolly grips. I mean, it used to be part of my deal that I got hired from. Dolly grip obviously is part of the grip department, but I would say if I'm doing the job, I'm bringing in the dolly grip, and it would piss off a lot of key grips, but they got it.
And
they
what
understood.
about first AC?
I always felt that was the DP's
thing, yeah.
chores, because especially, DPs do commercials. I don't do commercials. They don't use operators for commercials, DPs. And so that relationship, the assistant will do the commercial. So they have this relationship that goes past what the relationship of that particular film is. So, yeah, I mean, they'll obviously will talk with me about it and make sure I'm okay with that assistant, but I don't make it more of a deal about the dolly grip than the camera assistant.
You mentioned once, probably more than once, that the best camera operating is invisible.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about your ideology in terms of camera operating, the approach to that, and maybe the things that you like and things you don't like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two different types of camera operating. One of them is invisible, and one of them is the opposite of invisible. Well, it's sort of where the camera's like the third character in the film. And like I would, for example, say that Saving Private Ryan was like that. The whole film was handheld. The camera became another character in the film, especially since that movie. I think handheld is sort of gets misused a lot. And because when you're looking at a scene and it's handheld, you know that there's another person in that room with the actors, and it might be a really intimate scene, and it takes me away from it, So there's a time for handheld and there's a time not for it. But people think it's faster, just like Steadicam. They think it's faster, easier, quicker. They'll use it when it really, I don't think it's the correct choice. There's the sort of a subjective point of view and an objective point of view with the camera, and the objective point of view is sort of that quiet camera where you've done your job well if in the audience people don't even realize that there's a camera moving. And that doesn't mean the camera's not active, and you're not making choices. It's certainly not locked off frames, but everything is motivated by the story or by the actors or the vision of the director. But it's done in a way that's gracefully quiet, that it all makes sense. It's not excess movement. It's not, it doesn't point to the fact that there's a camera on the set making, recording all this stuff. But, it does, I'm not saying that's the way that everything should be operated. It's just, that's the way certain scenes should be. It just depends on what the film or the scene is.
I'm the same way. I like operating in a way that camera becomes invisible. And I like movies when I watch movies, I want it or not, I break them down. But I like the ones that even when I want to break them down, I just dive into it and I forget about lighting and camera movement. It all becomes invisible. And that's, I think, the best goal when you don't even think about it, so it's...
Yeah. exactly. When you're just watching the movie.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you might think of something and say, wow, how'd they do that shot? You know, must have been really difficult to do. But while you're sitting there watching the movie, you don't even think about it.
Yeah. That's, I think, another thing about this long take movies, you know, because sometimes they do this just because they can, and sometimes it just throws you away just because they want to do this slow. But there are movies that they do it so gracefully and carefully that you don't even think about it. And then sometimes I ask my wife, like, did you notice it was a long take? And I said, no, I didn't even think about it. I was like, good.
Yeah.
This is good.
Yeah. You know, there's two things examples of that I think are interesting. You know, one, there's this show, The Bear, which I think is great. And I don't know what season it was. I think it was the second season. It wasn't until, you know, if you watch it on Hulu, which is free, you don't have commercials. They still, I think, sometimes put gaps in there. I'm not always sure. But there was one episode, I think, in the second season where the whole 30 minutes is one take. And I didn't realize it until the very end when I said, wait a second, I don't think they actually ever cut. And I immediately watched the whole thing again. And I said, oh my God, they never cut. That whole thing was one take. And it's amazing. But you don't really notice it because it's the frenzy of what's happening in the kitchen. And the performances are so great. And the camera's always in the right place. I mean, it's stellar. It's stellar. And then there's another project, Adolescence, which I'm sure you've discussed, many times, which I think is great. Doing that show, each episode being one take, has its advantages and disadvantages. I mean, there were times when I sort of wish they would cut and maybe get a little closer, or there's this one scene with the lawyer and the kid, the whole thing in there, that I wish the camera could have been just a little bit lower, but because they were on Steadicam, they couldn't, I guess. So there are things you give up by doing it in one take. But what they gained by doing it in one take was that it gave the actors this ability to perform the whole scene from beginning to end. I think that was huge.
Yeah.
In that
that's
show.
what's more impressive to me. It's not even the camera work, but to orchestrate all this theater that they made it happen. That was to me the most impressive. You know,
I think it strengthened the performances by the fact that they didn't have to do it, 10 takes over and over again, and then do it again from another direction, and they just let it go. And it was very clever how they did it. They rehearsed for a week, and then they blocked it for a week, and then they shot it for a week 12 times, and picked the one best take. But sometimes it being one take, it was a little distracting, but I didn't get bogged down with it because I was so captured by the performances. It was really strong.
Yeah,
very moving.
It's interesting. In Adolescence, I can tell right away there was one take because of going through windows and stuff where you can tell that's like complicated stuff. But at the same time, when I asked my wife, did you see there was a one take? She said, no, I didn't see it. I was like, okay, because it's me who's seen this, but regular audience doesn't really pay attention to it. So it's, they done it well then.
yeah, exactly. People ask me all the time if I sit in the movie theater and dissect a movie, or can I sit there and watch it? And I say, I don't even think about the technical stuff when I'm watching the movie. If it's a good movie, I'm totally absorbed in it.
Yeah. And then, like I said, sometimes you just, even on purpose, you want to break it down. There are some films that I wanted to break down, and I started watching them, and at like 2 minutes in, I was like, I already forgot why I started watching it,
Yeah.
I want to talk more about the way you collaborate with DPs, because I know that your approach is a little bit different than traditional one, and that what actually interests me a lot, because you and the stuff you do, usually responsibilities of DPs, like working directly with directors, figuring out the shots, blocking, all that. Tell me more about it.
Yeah, I am definitely an operator that is, what's the word? I love to collaborate, and I'm happy. I love taking on responsibility, and I am not an operator that just pans and tilts the camera. that I want to be involved with the cinematic storytelling, the visual storytelling of film. I know this might offend a lot of your viewers, but I might get hired by the DP, but I feel like I work for the director. And oftentimes I get hired by the director on a movie. But and I feel like camera operating should have been a DGA job and not a local 600,
Okay.
job. Because, every job is different. But if you work with a director that has a strong visual language, somebody like Spielberg or there's so many directors I've worked with that have a strong language. Like right now I'm working a lot with Noah Hawley, from Fargo and Alien Earth and those. It's important that you have a direct line of communication with them because it's their vision. Most directors don't understand light. I think maybe they see it if they don't like it, but they don't really understand the subtlety of it. But the camera, if they have a strong visual language, they understand everything about the movement of the camera and the choice of the lens and how to block a scene. And those are the directors that I love working with. And I have a lot of experience from the list of movies I've done and the directors I've worked with that I can be an asset to them. I can help them. And I think they appreciate that. Does that sometimes offend the DP? Yes. Most DPs that I work with realize, that's just an ego thing, right? And in the end, we're all making a better movie, a better project, if we all give it our best. And so if I have a relationship with the director, I'm not preventing the DP to have a relationship with the director. I want to be, have a seat at the table as well. And I'm giving now the DP opportunity to spend more time on the lighting and maybe have an overall picture about what's going on that I might not have by, having my eye on the eyepiece. So I don't think I'm taking anything away from the DP's relationship with the director, but I'm adding, it's like adding more texture to the project. Maybe that's a better way of doing it. And, it's a tricky position being a camera operator because there are times when the DP and the director don't get along and they don't have the same idea and I'm stuck in between in the middle. And people ask me what I do in that situation and I'll be honest and I say, right off the bat, I'll know who's right and who's wrong, right? In the sense of them, what's best for the film. And most of the time it's usually the director because the DP primary is interested in lighting and sometimes the director will create a shot that's complicated that might compromise the lighting. And so that's when the arguments sort of come. And I try to be very diplomatic and I try to convince them. It's not always like that. Sometimes the director is making a mistake and I'll, being very diplomatic, try to, help the DP to convince the director that this is a better idea. And sometimes it's the other way around.
And that's probably the art itself.
Yeah.
You've been between all this and navigating all that.
I used to say the camera operators were the Henry Kissingers of the set. And I said that enough that I finally realized, wow, most people on set these days, they don't even know who Henry Kissinger is anymore. But that's aging myself. But, if it finally comes to absolutely, I cannot get the negotiations to work for one side to agree with the other, I have to side with the director because they're the boss to me, is the director. But it doesn't happen that often where it gets to that point. Usually I'm able to get, people to all agree what's the best way of doing it.
Yeah. Interesting. I've heard stories that the way you work with Spielberg and Kaminski, that sometimes Kaminski just go away, do lighting, and you just figuring out Spielberg camera movement, blocking and all that, and he comes back and what are we doing?
It's happened that way. Yash's job on a Spielberg movie is really difficult because Steven designs these shots that are, 180, 360, and he doesn't want to know how difficult it might be to light it. He'll just expect Janusz to be able to light it, and quickly. So Janusz has his hands full. And it's the same thing with the camera. I mean, I've done so many movies. I think I've done 17 or 18 movies with Steven, and I understand his language really well. And I found through the years that when Steven is describing a shot, if I don't hear it directly, if I'm not standing next to him and hear him say the words, let's say I'm like getting off the crane or, wrapping up this last shot and Steven's already talking about the next shot. If I'm not there and I hear the shot from somebody else, it's always wrong. It is always wrong. And, Steven describes the shot and then he'll leave and he'll come back. And if I've heard the shot from somebody else, he'll say, "What's this? This isn't what I asked for." So I've learned, even Janusz doesn't always understand the shot as well as I do, because I understand that language so well that Steven uses. But, Steven is very specific about what he wants. And he'll explain the shot and then he leaves and he lets us or figure out how to execute the shot. What's the best piece of equipment? Where's the best place to put all this, the base of the crane or whatever we're doing, the track, to best execute this shot. And sometimes what he wants is impossible. I'll have to go to him and say, "Steven, I'm so sorry, we can't do this shot. Can we break it up?" And he'll usually understand, and we do. But the challenge for us is to figure out how to execute the shot. He has the vision, and we have the ability to execute it. But like I say, the execution of the shot is, I might know where Steven wants to start, where he wants to finish, but everything in between is me, in the dolly grip.
Spielberg's blocking in movies, just hands down my favorites. It's always so inspiring, the way camera moves, the way actors move in the scene. I mean, it's just mesmerizing to me every time I watch it, And I'm wondering, how does that process go? Because since you directly with the director figuring out the shots, you have to be knowing this blocking so well, because it's not only coming from him, you have to also, from the technical perspective, to figure out how that works. How does that, tell me more.
Steven doesn't shot list, he doesn't storyboard unless it's a big effects or action sequence. He always shows up like a half hour before call. We always have, the second there with the lenses and a finder. And Steven likes to walk around the set thinking about what that first shot is. And we always give him the space to sort of, because during prep, I know he has ideas about what he wants to do, but until you're actually on a dress set or see the actors rehearse on that set, I don't know how people make shot lists. It doesn't make any sense to me. And, and watching Steven, to me, is proof of that. But that's, again, a whole nother story. But so we give Steven the space. He figures out what the first shot is. And that's all. Once he knows what his first shot is, he's happy. And that first shot is usually, it's a master, and it's a very complicated shot that will cover the whole scene. And then after we shoot that shot, he then knows what the second shot will be based on how the first shot worked out, whether he can just move on or whether the pieces he needs to pick up, or even if it's not the whole scene, it really dictates what the next shot is. It's a really organic process. It's being in tune to what the actor's doing, what the story is, the script, and it just happens naturally. There isn't like, okay, shot one, wide shot two, over the shoulder, shot three, close up, which is fascinating to me. And it's always been great watching Steven work like that. A lot of what I've learned from Steven, and he's always been like that. I mean, when we did, Fabelmans, he was making, it was about him making movies as a kid, and he was doing the same blocking when he was making movies in high school. I mean, he thinks like a camera. When we rehearse a scene, he doesn't just watch it as a director or thinking about the performances of the actors, which he does, but he also watches it as if he's a 27 millimeter lens, and he understands, you know, how he's best going to be able to capture those performances during the rehearsal.
That's what's impressive to me, because I don't know where it's coming from, because you watch Jaws, and it's, again, one of the first ones, and you look at the blocking, and it's like it's done by someone who's done many movies before, and it's like, how come, you know? Is it because of, I mean, how do you get born with it, you know? Is it because of watching other films? So
I mean, he's a big, you know, cinephile. I mean, he's watched so many movies, but he's also like Mozart. I mean, he's a child prodigy, I think. I mean, he's just, like I say, he's born with a camera in his brain, and he sees everything that way.
How did you meet? Because you were there way before Kaminski, and how?
No, I came, you know, Janusz had done Schindler's List, and then after Schindler's List, I met with Janusz, and he, you know, we had lunch together, and he asked me if I would work with him. But we did 2 or 3 other films before Lost World, Jurassic Park, which was the first film I did with Steven. So, and that was not a great experience, but
I've heard about stories that because it was like within 1 year, he had to be doing prep after the Schindler's List, doing prep for Jurassic Park, which was really taxing.
Yeah, because Jurassic Park, that there were a lot of storyboards and stuff, because the visual effects needed that information. They had to start working. It takes them much longer, especially back then, to do those effects than it does to shoot live action. Steven works quick. I mean, there was a period of time when we would do, I think twice, literally 3 films in a row, where we would shoot one film while we were shooting. He was prepping the second film. We'd start shooting the second film. He's editing the first film and prepping the third film, and then we go right into the third film. It was just nonstop.
How do you keep up with that?
How does he keep up with it? You know, every day at lunch he would go to the editing room. Wow. You know.
Yeah, it is impressive. You know.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you make a film and they like need some rest for a few months before you take it out. But this one, like,
no, I don't think
2 or 3 movies a year for many years. Wow.
Yeah. It's not that right now, but it was intense for a while. There's just so much work, and Steven's jobs are hard because we work really fast and it's complicated, and he's demanding, and we work really fast.
But is he perfectionist, or he lets some mistakes slip?
You know, it's interesting. He is not as much of a perfectionist as I am, and I learned that pretty quickly. That, you know, it was on Lost World, Jurassic Park. There was like a big dolly shot we had set up in the back lot at Universal, and it was on ground, and it had recently rained, and it was a very long dolly shot. And Jack Glenn, who was a dolly grip, had laid the track beautifully. Everything was wedged up, and you know, but after every take, you know, the wedges would sink a little bit. So Jack had to go back and, you know, tighten up all the wedges. And I think it was the second or third take. We don't do many takes with Steven. In the middle of the track, there was a huge bump, and Steven calls cut. Great, we're moving on. And I go running over to you know, Video Village, and I say, Steven, we got to do it again. There was a big bump in the shot. And he says, we're not going again. It's in the movie. That was his response. It was like, it's in the movie. And I remember the first time I saw the film, I was waiting for that scene to see if I saw this big bump. And I didn't see it. It wasn't, so either he cut around it, one, or he fixed it. visual effects, which I don't think he did. But I think most likely is that I was just so absorbed in the story that I didn't even notice it.
Wow.
So I realized then that, and this is, there's a thing that I think is important for operators to learn, which is I call the art of compromise, which is to understand what you can get away with when you really do need another take, because you have to understand what the cost of is another take, not just financially, but the actors had just given a great performance and now you're asking them to do it again, where the director now has one less shot, to get during the day. And the DP is going to be rushed, because they're going to try to make up. So there's all these elements that you have to play in your head to say, how important is it, this mistake that I think I made to ask for another take? Because I would say to you that as long as my career has been, I don't think I've ever done a perfect shot. I think I could always do something better. There's always some little thing I could tweak or, make better. But if I asked for another take every time I think I could make it better, the films would never be finished.
Yeah, I understand that very well, because I used to be very perfectionist, but I quickly start to discipline myself in terms of you have to always estimate. Yeah, like you said, you can always do better, but is it worth this little 5% better for the schedule, for all this running behind overtime?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think, okay, I would rather maybe spend this time getting another shot, or maybe additional one to cover whatever wasn't working. So,
plus the actors too. I think about the actors. As an operator, it's important you have a great relationship with the actors. I have front row center seat for all these great performances, and the actors have to trust you as an operator, that they can abandon themselves to this performance and that you will protect them. That's our job, to protect the actors in a way. If they've just given this heart-rendering, difficult performance, and you say, "Can you do it again?" There's just, there was just a little bump in the track. That damages, I think, the relationship with the actors. So,
But sometimes I think there are cases when, when you make a take and you feel like it didn't work out, but you don't want to say about it, but your face says about two actors and the actors see do you need another one? Let me help you out with that.
Yeah. It's funny because, I would, in a million years, I would never give an actor a note about their performance. But, when the director calls cut, the first person they see is the operator. And it's just, I'll give a thumbs up or a nod or something just to encourage them. But what you just did was fantastic. And I felt it. I think they really appreciate that. But you're right. I think there are times when they would appreciate another take, and you sometimes will take the fall for them. I like the relationship between operating and the actors. I have tremendous respect for what actors do.
I remember 3 years ago I did a film, and I watched so many Spielberg's movies just to learn the blocking. So I have it at my disposal in case something happens, the film, so I know some tricks. And I remember there was one scene that we were running behind so bad that it was an apartment scene and we were running behind, and there was no way we could make a day because there were so many setups. And I was saying to the director, if you give me an opportunity, I may be able to fix it, with blocking. And he said, yeah, sure, if you can do something. So I thought about it for 15 minutes, remember all those movies that I watched. And I figured out the blocking in a way. So we do this as a continuous take. When the actors are moving, I'm doing one single take, but in a way they're moving. So I get his close up, her close up, because they change it. They go in on one side of the room, they go in on the other side of the room, they go into the kitchen, they go back to the living room, and I made like lighting in the living room warm, in the kitchen cold. So every time they have like a argument, and every time they calm down, they go to the warm light, and every time they start arguing again, they go into the cold light, and all this dance of figuring out.
Nice.
And I was able to shoot the scene for probably like 45 minutes, and we were, instead of being behind the schedule, we were ahead of the schedule, just because of this smart figuring out.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be able to do this without all these movies, because I figured out like there is a way to actually do this smart and more elegant way, and everyone was like so surprised how we were able to keep
very
up,
grateful.
Like the script supervisor, she was so defending, and she was so scared they were not going to be able to, and she was insisting on coverage and stuff like that. And I said, no, if you take another shot of coverage, the whole thing falls apart,
Yeah.
I'm glad we didn't do any coverage, because the scene is beautiful,
Yeah.
Thanks to those films,
Well, Steven, he's great at orchestrating the camera and the actors, and a large part of that is it furthers the story, but there's another part that it's really efficient, and it's less coverage, and we work quicker and faster. So there's a dual purpose to it.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much from Steven, and it's not everyone's style to do it that way, but I, as an operator, like to, when the actors rehearse a scene for the first time, traditionally it's, the director and script supervisor and the DP, in the room when the actors rehearse. And I really try to insist that I'm also part of that original group of people that see it, because, a lot of directors don't understand, especially if they're young directors, they're just so excited that the actors are performing, this script that maybe they wrote, and how beautiful the performances are, that they let them do whatever they want. It's not necessarily bad, but there is a way to direct the actors that doesn't compromise their performances, but helps the visual storytelling of the film. So, and I find that especially young directors are really grateful to have someone who's keeping an eye out for them that way, And so I'm there, and I'll, politely say, if that actor just said that line here, would have this great, transition into this other part of the scene, and you get the close up, and then the blah blah. There's just a lot of ways to orchestrate the actors to block out the choreography that, like I say, it doesn't compromise their performance, but just elevates the scene.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes experience, I think, unless you're Spielberg and you're born with that.
How much freedom do you get in terms of framing in terms of, I don't know, like headroom, how to move the camera, what lenses to choose? What are the conversations with DP?
There's not a whole lot of discussion about headroom.
Headroom is, to me, it's such a complicated topic, even though it feels so easy. But headroom is such a thing that it's really hard to teach what headroom is.
Yeah.
Because depending on the framing and depending on aspect ratio, all those little things, it always changes, and it's kind of just a feeling. Sometimes it may not be the right by the book, but it just feels right,
Right. Sometimes, I tend to like tight headroom, but there are some shots that you want to give a huge amount of headroom because it just feels like, whether it's the architecture or the, what the actor is doing, it makes sense. I don't know why. I think that either the DPs and director just trust what I'm doing with the headroom, or we all are on the same page.
Yeah, probably when it's right, it's right. So you don't have to give any notes.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about lenses? Do you choose lenses, or you?
That's like, I find that's like a collaborative process. You know, it's like when we're in that moment of rehearsal, you know, I'll call for a lens from the assistant. They come with a finder usually, and the three of us will look at it. And, you know, the DP might say, can you give me a little bit more room over here, or blah, blah, blah. So maybe we'll go with a little bit tighter lens, and the director might have another. So that one I don't get possessive about. It's like what I can make any lens work, I think. And it's like what best tells, you know, every lens is a different emotion and a different story. So, you know, whether you want to compress it or be present or, you know, be distant, and how wide you need to be and what the set gives you. And so, but, I mean, the lens that I might call out first tends to be what we use. But if, you know, if there's a strong preference by the DP or the director, I don't have an issue changing.
And what about camera movements? Do you have input on that?
Oh yeah, sure. You know, of course. It's, you know, and again, you know, watching the rehearsals, seeing the performances, I'll suggest, boy, this would be a great place for, you know, a slow push in. And or like here's an example. We were doing Fargo, and again, you know, the directors have these preconceived ideas about how they want something to work before they've actually seen the set or the actors perform it. And this director wanted the camera to this kid sleeping, like 3 kids in the room, and for the camera to come in and go through the kid sleeping and end up on this one child. And it wasn't working. And I said to the director, you know, it feels like I'm a prowler. You know, it feels like invasive. I think we should try starting on the kid and going backwards and pulling out and, you know, end in the frame of the doorway. And it worked so much better. It felt, you know, sort of happy and gentle, and as opposed to violent. It was just a simple difference of just reversing, wow. You know.
Yeah.
And I don't think the director realized it because she was so intent on what she had prevised and storyboarded.
That's another evil, you know.
Yeah.
You have something baked into the mind with the storyboards and stuff.
But she was so grateful. I mean, she was thrilled.
Good.
To do it that way. So yeah, camera movement. That's what we do. So I have a good sense of it, and am happy to contribute and collaborate.
Any tricks on how not to make director or DP not to feel like you want to take their job?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious. And if it isn't, I tell the DP, that's the last job I want, is to be a cinematographer. I mean, I made a choice years ago that I was a good camera operator. It's the best job on set. I'm really happy to do this. I don't want to be a DP. So there's no reason why I would threaten their job. And certainly I'm not threatening the director's job. That's a whole other thing.
Did you want to direct?
You know, I think I did a film once with Ridley Scott, Matchstick Men, and he said to me that if there ever was a good training ground for being a director, it's being a camera operator, because, you know, you're working with the actors and the DP and the director, and you're like basically the eye of the hurricane. You're sitting right in the center of all this, the process of what it takes to make a movie. And he was right. It's a great training ground to be a director. And there was a time when I thought that I would have been a good director, and I wanted to direct, but I was so busy operating and working that, you know, to make that commitment to being a director, that's plus I'm not a writer. So that's, I think.
But do you have to be?
You know, I think being a writer-director helps.
Does Spielberg write?
Yeah. He does. He does.
So-
But he.
It's like collaboration with someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's written. I mean, Fablemans. He wrote himself.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But there are many directors who don't.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
No,
still
of
very
course.
successful.
I wasn't. I guess I just wasn't ready to make that commitment. I was having.
What about future?
No, it's. I'm winding down my career, and to take on, a challenge like directing, as much as I mean, I'd love to try it once, but I'm.
I don't know. I just have a feeling you would do so well in that position
Well,
because
thank
you have
I really-
strong vision. You have strong ideas in terms of how things should be and shouldn't be.
Yeah,
So maybe I'll inspire you to make a film.
I think, if I had any regrets to my career, it was that I didn't push that more to direct. But I'm not going to obsess about it. I've had a great career, and I love operating the camera. And if I can help other directors accomplish their vision, I'm happy.
And if you were to direct a film, what would it be? What kind of genre?
It would not be action.
What of the action?
No. And it would be, I mean, I love movies that are very simple movies about character transitions and,
Like Fargo?
yeah, I love Fargo.
I love Fargo, yeah.
Yeah, I love movies about people and the transitions they make in life.
I want to talk briefly about Saving Private Ryan, because it feels like that must be one of the most challenging camera operating gigs you had. Because I look at it, and because I operate, I know how tough things can be. But I look at this and I was like, this must be really tough.
It was hard.
It was hard, yeah.
I have a theory about it, and I don't know if I'm right because I've never really discussed it with Janusz. But I feel like we arrived. The first thing we shot was the D-Day, the Normandy invasion. We shot it in Ireland, in the southeastern corner of Ireland. And I remember showing up for the little amount of prep that we did. And, we're walking around and we see the first things we were going to shoot. And the very first shot we did in the movie, the very day one, shot number one, was the shot that was the camera on my shoulder in the back of the landing craft when the door opens and they just immediately get mowed down by the machine guns coming from the pillboxes. And the camera was on my shoulder because there was no room in the thing for even a tripod. I mean, everyone was crammed in there. So the only way to do it was for me to be like handheld. Take one happens. It's so violent, and there's blood and guts that's going everywhere. And I'm sitting back there reacting to what I'm seeing. It was very powerful. And I think, and I don't know 100%, but I believe in my mind that it wasn't until that moment that Steven decided that he wanted to do the whole movie handheld. Now, this might air and everyone's going to get on my case about that and saying, no, that was always planned. But it felt to me like that was the moment when Steven decided that this had to be done handheld. The problem is that all the equipment we had was not handheld equipment. It was a Panavision Platinum with this big image shaker on it, and Janusz had a flasher on there as well. It was really heavy, and everything they wanted was this like really low angle, and it was before great video monitors, and it was. I mean, there was one point where we do the big run from the beach, the surf to I forgot the terminology. I think the shingle, which is like just at the base of the cliff. And, all the stuff we're doing is basically 1-2 cameras. I think for that big run, we had 3 cameras, but that's it. And Steven would only do these things once because it was so costly and time consuming to set up all the effects, the squibs and the explosions and everything. So we rehearsed it a couple of times, actors in full pack. They're very safety conscious. Everything's marked out where all the bullet hits are going to be and the explosions and the hand grenades. And I'm following Tom Hanks, and they want the camera really low. And so, like I said, this was before good video
So
monitors.
you just have to do it by feeling because you can't really watch.
I thought my plan was I had a long eyepiece on it that I was going to run, holding the camera. And I did it during the rehearsals. It worked out fine. But we rehearsed a couple of times. It was hot, and the actors wanted to shoot. And they said, Steven, let's just shoot. And Steven said, okay, let's shoot. Roll camera, blah, blah. We get everything set in action. And it was so different than what we had rehearsed without any of the effects going off. Mm-hmm. It was literally insane. It's like the whole world was blowing up. And I'm like trying to run after Tom, who's also freaked out and panicking and running much faster than he did in rehearsal. And I realized there was no way I can do the shot like this. And so I just took my eye off the eyepiece and just started running as fast as I could with the camera. Mm-hmm. I'm not even sure I'm following Tom Hanks because, I'm following. And the eyepiece is pointing straight up in the air. This is where I could have been fogging this entire shot, from sun going through the eyepiece. And I remember us both hitting this shingle at the same time, first Tom and then me. And we hear a cut coming over the loudspeakers. And Tom looks at me and he goes, holy shit. Because it was insane. I mean, it was so different with all the effects going off.
I mean, it must be the adrenaline pumps up.
Oh, yeah. And then on top of that, I was terrified that I had screwed up the shot because I left the eyepiece pointing straight up. And it took 2-3 days before we got dailies back to see that it was okay. But that was probably one of the most terrifying shots I've ever done.
I once did a scene, like a war scene in a movie. And they were using blanks, and we were filming in a way so they shooting almost towards the camera. And when we did rehearsal and everything, when they started the scene, they started shooting, and that's loud. And when all of this started shooting lower, the adrenaline pumps up, and I was like, you like actually there in the war zone, And I can't even imagine what you had there with all these explosions and stuff.
Yeah, people don't realize that. They don't use blanks anymore like we used to do it. But if you're with an automatic weapon, you have to use a full load. And a full load is exactly the same as a real bullet, a real full loaded bullet. The only difference is there isn't the projectile. But it's still loud, and you still feel that concussion of air pressure. I had, on the rock, Sean Connery, like firing a machine gun this close to me.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't matter how much safety stuff you have on. It's still terrifying.
We did also full load. I don't know if it was appropriate to that. And I also remember there are some scenes I actually wanted to get closer to this to feel, And I remember it was start firing, I was like, and you can feel it, it just goes to you, like, it was terrifying.
Not many people can say that they've been in front of a live weapon firing because, it literally is the same as a real bullet.
In a way, I feel like you just get this adrenaline, and when you're doing this, you just keep doing it. I remember once I shot from the helicopter, the doors open. Mm-hmm. And I was filming, I was like going like this, filming the New York. And at some point I got enough footage and I took the camera down and I looked this way. And I was like, wow. And I was sitting back, but with the camera, I was like getting out and all this, I just didn't feel it,
Yeah.
Something with the camera, you just don't think
about it. Oh my God, I've done so many crazy things, in my career, especially when I was younger, I wouldn't do now. But, when the adrenaline is rushing and it's important to get a shot, I'll tell you a funny story. You can cut it out if you want to, but there was a movie I did years ago, early in my career, called Terror in Copper Valley, I think was the name of it. And it was basically a car chase thing. And there was a shot that the director wanted, which was the hero of the film was this woman who was like driving a school bus, but it was a van type of school bus. And he wanted a shot over her shoulder as she goes through an intersection and hits a watermelon truck. And he says, we just don't want to rig a camera. We want you to operate the shot. And I said, oh, yeah, sure, okay, no problem. And the key, they rig up, I'm on they rig up the whole thing, the key grips do. And they I don't know what they were thinking, but they thought the more mass in there, the safer it will be. So it was on a big Fisher dolly. They wedged everything, all the wheels, they strapped everything on so that for that moment of impact, it would be safe, right? So we go to our number one position. It's a stunt driver driving it, the double, and the director calls action, and the stunt woman accelerates so quickly that all the rigging that the grips had put on the dolly and the camera, everything moved backwards, and everything got slack. Like I'm looking, and like the dolly is just floating freely in the bus, and like there's no wedges, everything were loose. I should have called cut, but I was like too panicked to even do that. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe she'll miss the truck. And I'm thinking, no, she's supposed to hit the truck. And I see the truck coming down, the road, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna go right through the windshield of this bus. And she hits the watermelon truck. It's a little bit like a bee sting. It wasn't that bad. She goes through the intersection, she puts on the brakes, and everything moves back to where it was supposed to be. And everybody comes running up to me after the shot. How was it? How did you get the shot? How did it go? And everything looked fine, like the rigging was all normal. And I had no idea if I had gotten the shot because I was so panicked about dying that, but I said, yeah, it was great. I sort of lied because I certainly didn't want to do it again. And I again had to wait for dailies. And, I think we were shooting in Arizona, so we had a couple of days away. I saw the dailies and I actually did the shot I was supposed to do, but completely, totally instinctual because I had no memory of doing the shot.
Did you tell the story on the dailies?
No.
Oh my God. Okay. Do you have any discipline when operating on a shoulder? Like things that you don't like or things that you during the years figure out that works the best? Because sometimes I feel like there are some operators that when I operate they add some movement, and stuff like that. And I personally like when camera, even though in the shoulder, try to hold it as steady as possible, and only move when something moves in the shot, so whatever your movement is invisible when something is moving in the shot. Do you have any tricks or disciplines what you do when you do handheld?
Not really. I mean, specific tricks, no. I mean, I agree with you that even if the camera's handheld, I try to keep it as still as possible. I don't try to add anything to it. I mean, Steven's always saying, make it rougher. And I'm trying not to because I know that just the simple fact that it's on your shoulder, it's gonna move a little bit. And so I try to keep it as still as I can. But I've gone through different devices and different tools to try to help make it more stable. And in the end, the simpler the better for me. I just put it on my shoulder and just make sure the handles are in a good spot.
Do you use Easy Rig, Ergo Rig, all these things? No?
I've tried. The Easy Rig to me, I use it for a while and I realized, it's amplifying that move. I just like it on my shoulder.
Yeah.
It's different now. No, I know because, digital, you can shoot longer, with film. Most handheld shots were with 400-foot mag, so you were only going to have to do a 4-minute take. And although there were times I put a 1,000-foot mag on because it balanced better, because it's always so front heavy with the 400-foot mag. But no, I mean, I've tried all those things, and I'm not saying they're not good for other people, but for me, I'm just like it on my shoulder.
I want to talk about the scene from Munich when there is a long take, the long lens zooming in and zooming out.
Oh yeah, the first assassination. I think.
It was like to me one of the most memorable shots ever in history. You know, and like, can you tell me more about the technical side, the difficulties that you had, and all of that? Because it feels like there is a lot of logistics to pull this off.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing, I know the scene you're talking about, and it's one of my favorite. Munich is one of my favorite movies I've ever done. I mean, I love Munich.
I love this film,
and especially the visual storytelling of Munich. And Steven was at the height of his, you know, able to orchestrate the camera to tell stories. That whole scene that you're talking about, there's hardly any dialogue in it. I don't know how long it is, like 3 minutes. Yeah. And it's just, it's sound effects and it's action and it's cars and we use every different mode of camera movement, you know, from handheld to crane to dolly to me sitting in, in the back of a car as it races around the corner. You know, we shot that. I'm trying to remember. I believe we shot that whole scene completely in order. Mm-hmm. It's not one shot, but it's all, you know. We started with the first shot, which that weird reflection upside down in the car, and we tilt up to realize what the reality of where we are, and to see the professor that's going to be assassinated, and we follow him, and then each shot. I believe I don't think Steven storyboarded everything, and it just that first shot then dictated what the next shot would be, and it just leads us into the whole sequence of events. And I will say that the final shot in that scene, which is an amazing shot, is, you know, they shoot, the guy's got his bag of groceries. Mm-hmm. They all smash to the ground, and you see, this milk on the floor, and then you see, and there's a spent casing in the milk, and then all of a sudden you see blood moving into the milk, and then you see, you know, somebody pick up that shell. That was totally improvised. Wow. I mean, that just happened. It's just like, it wasn't planned. It was like we were sitting there filming, and there was the milk, and then all of a sudden there was the blood, and it was just perfect. And then following up, I can't remember the actor's name. It was great. And there's like this historical shot. It was this great scene, and it was all happenstance.
And wow.
You have to be, so that's where confidence comes into, that you have to be open to those things happening and not think that you have to structure and control everything.
That's another thing about great operating, because you have to be, it's about what you're going to do if something doesn't go off script. Mm-hmm. How are you going to react? Are you going to follow it? Are you going to let it go out of the frame? You're going to pen it up, tilt it down, all this instinct thing, you know?
Yeah.
Another shot I want to talk about is very different from that one, is in The Kingsman, when all the fire going on, because that feels also very different from anything I've seen before.
Totally different style of directing.
Different styles and different cinematography, camera operating, all that.
Yeah. You know, first of all, we did, I was the only American on that crew, which was really fun. And George Richmond is a dear friend of mine, was the DP. The English style of working is very different than the American style, where, the grip crew just takes care of the camera. They have nothing to do with the lighting. So some DPs don't like it because they've lost half of their, the grips here, set flags and set the nets, and they do a lot of the work. There in England, they just do the camera. They do the rigging for the camera, but but it means you have all these people that are paying attention to making sure the camera's taken care of. I like that. And the dolly grips are the key grip is the dolly grip, and they're very good. But in that film, I remember, we did take after take after take after take, as opposed to Steven, who's very quick. We do 2-3 takes and we're done.
Is it because you have to stitch all these shots together and they have to align perfectly, or?
I just think it's just the director was
style.
David Fincher's the same thing. He likes to do a lot of takes. I'll never forget, there was this one scene, the actor now who we see everywhere, Pedro Pascal, right? Mm-hmm. He's in The Kingsman. And there's a scene where he's holding a gun and he's pointing the gun. It's in the diner. And guns are heavy and, they're real.
Mm-hmm.
They're not, unless you're doing a fight scene or something where there might be rubber, they're real heavy metal. And we did so many takes that he couldn't hold up the gun anymore. It was so heavy. So we had to rig a C-stand underneath his arm to help him hold that. And they took out the C-stand
Nice.
digitally. But it was a fun film to do. I don't have a lot of memories of it, but I'm trying to even think of the fight scenes. A lot of that was digital stuff, in slow motion. And
Are there things that you, I don't know, watch movies or films, and there are things that you see in camera operation that bothers you?
yeah, only when there's too much movement, or when I know that they're on a steady cam just because they're trying to save time and they think they're being efficient, and they just think it's easier to cover it all steady cam, and I hate that, because I always see the horizon wobble. I always see it wobble, no matter how good the steady cam is.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So that bugs me, and also, if it's handheld, and I think I don't understand why the camera's handheld here. It doesn't fit with the scene or the acting or the story, and I know that really the only reason they're doing it is because it's quicker. But to me, it's just bad craftsmanship. So those things bother me. But in terms of headroom or a choice of how they would frame it, I don't think about that too much.
It's because it could be a taste. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you were in a jury to judge camera operating, what would you look at?
That's a really hard thing. And, being a part of the SOC, we give out awards for, Camera Operator of the Year in film and television. And I always say that it's like, I don't know how you judge one creative endeavor is better than another. Plus, I find it even more difficult because a lot of what a camera operator does is outside of the frame line. It's like what we keep out of the frame, the choices we make to edit what we put in the frame. And that's so important to a skill and talent of what a camera operator does, but the audience never sees that. And then the other thing, a camera operator, part of what makes a good operator or not is how well they run the set, because in lots of ways we do run the set because everything has to go through the camera, the boom end, the frame line. Set dressers want to know what the frame is. The grips where to set flags, lights. It's like I said before, it's like we are at sitting in the eye of the hurricane, and it has to be calm and confident in that eye. But you have to disseminate the information to all the departments, and you have to, in a lot of way, you're running the set, not the same way the AD is, but in another way. So those are all skills and talents that are invisible, and I don't know how you judge that.
Yeah. Okay, let's play a game. It's this or that, and I'm gonna do it. Okay, film or digital?
That's a hard one. I'm going to say digital because the film cameras are they're old and they're falling apart and they're not taking care of them now. I love the way film looks, and I know that Steven will always shoot film and Paul Thomas Anderson will always shoot film, and I love them for that. It looks great, but it's a pain in the ass to shoot film.
Eyepiece or monitor?
These are good questions. It depends. I love the eyepiece. I love the eyepiece because you get in a zone, and no one, you're not bothered by all the extraneous people, around the camera. But if you're doing a really difficult shot where you have to, you're moving the camera, 300 degrees, being on a monitor is a lot easier, and being on a remote head makes it so much easier. And you can do so much more now with remote heads, but those are monitors. So
daylight or night?
Well, God, these are good questions. I don't mind working nights. I actually am a night person anyway. But it depends, if it's cold and rainy, I prefer day.
Static or dynamic shots?
dynamic. Yeah. Although I love a beautiful static frame, if it's composed and useful, it's great.
On stage or on location?
It's all these questions. There's no one single answer. Everything is
some of those
different.
questions are tricky.
It depends on where the stage is, I guess. But I like stage work. There's something comfortable about being in a controlled environment.
Scripted or improvised?
It's all improvised. When you say scripted, I'm not sure what that means. I mean, there's a script. I might have the sides. I understand what it is, but
If sometimes they go off script and start moving different.
oh yeah, I'm fine. I love that.
Storyboarded or figurative?
That's why I'm going to interject. I love shooting rehearsals, as opposed to rehearsing it and not filming it. It's, I know the camera assistants hate me for it, but I love to shoot rehearsals. As long as everybody knows it's a rehearsal, sometimes magic happens that doesn't happen.
Storyboarded or figure out on the day?
Figure out on the day.
Spherical or anamorphics?
Anamorphic.
Wide angles or long lenses?
Wide angle.
Natural light or artificial?
That's out of my department, really, but I love natural light.
You still have a preference, yeah. Color or black and white?
Oh, I love black and white, but we don't get an opportunity to do that very much.
Epic scenes or intimate moments?
I'm not going to make a choice on that. I like them both. I love the bigness of shots, but I love, like I say, the intimate moment of characters interacting with each other.
Long takes or quick cuts?
Oh, long takes.
Shoulder, tripod, dolly. Oh,
Dolly.
let's add Technocrane.
Crane actually was always my first choice.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Experimental or classic techniques?
I'm open to anything, honestly. I feel it's one of my talents is that I don't make judgment. Like whatever your vision is, I'm happy to go with it.
Small crew or big crew?
I mean, I've done both, and they're a big crew means you get more done and you have more talent. Small crew, it's more of a struggle and you have to work faster. Usually, I don't know. It's hard to say. They both have their purpose.
So, the last question would be, what's the difference between good and not good DP and good and not good director? How to be a better one,
Well, let's start with directing. There are a lot of, in my experience, there are a lot of different types of directors. There's a writer director. And they obviously have written the script, and I find that writer directors tend, for the most part, to just like close-ups because they just want to see the actors' lips moving, saying the words that they wrote. Then there are actors directors who are probably were actors at one point in their career and now they're directors, and so they're really concerned about performance and less about the visual storytelling process. There are directors that are producer directors that they're great at making the deal and getting the job, but at that point, then once they're there, they can sometimes be lost. I used to have all the different types of directors, and then obviously there's the visual director who
used to be DP.
Well, yeah, or somebody like Michael Bay that just wants to get one cool shot after the next and not really concerned with story or with acting. And all of those directors have a place in cinema in making movies. But to me, the best directors are the ones that have all of those things. That they're great with story, they're great with actors, they're great with the camera, and so it's the synthesis of those things that are the directors that I like to work with, especially the ones that have a vision and a unique style. So I would say, if for young directors to be better is to know all those things, and to understand. A lot of young directors don't really understand the camera that well, and not to be intimidated by it. I've taught classes at AFI to directors, and I tell them not to get obsessed with shot lists, especially before you've seen the sets or the rehearsals, the actors, and And if you do a shot list for your own preparation, I understand, do those, but you don't have to share them with everyone. Mm-hmm. They can be your personal notes. But yeah, I think as much as it is, those elements are important to a director, it's really important that directors understand that it's cinema, it's not theater, and that you have to understand the camera to make good cinema. DPs, I mean, I think I understand the craft of directing more than I do the craft of cinematographers, honestly. I mean, obviously, they're under tremendous pressure. They have to light scenes, and they have to work quickly, and they have to, digital. I think if digital has changed anything dramatically, it's the cinematographer's craft has changed tremendously, because now it used to be when we film with film, that there was this magic alchemy that happens with the labs, and no one really knew what the image was going to look like until we saw dailies. But now, when you shoot digital, there's 20 monitors on the set, and everyone knows exactly what it's going to look like. And so then everyone has an opinion on, brighter, darker, bluer, warmer, contrast. It's like, and so DPs tend to, a lot of them hang out in the DIT tent, and they never come out of the DIT tent and be on the set. That sort of drives me crazy. I understand how important it is to be there with the digital imaging technician, but the work is happening outside.
Sometimes it's directors who out there somewhere in a tent, and he wants to be just next to be director. Sometimes that's, but I agree with what you definitely 100%. You have to be there in the field next to the camera.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to set up a shot and the look and everything, but you don't have to spend the whole time in there. And I like directors that are out by the camera as well, But I think with all the crafts, director, DP, operator, assistant, loader, like the most important skill is to be kind. I really think that, it's a hard business. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of pressure. We're all standing next to each other 12 plus hours a day in sometimes horrible conditions. We all want to make a great movie, but you have to be kind to each other. I mean, you'll get a lot more done if you're understanding and sympathetic. And that's why, having done all the crafts, being a PA, loader, or second, first, I understand what they're going through, so I can be, more understanding of all the issues that they have to deal with. And I always say that, it's important that the skills of the job are really important, but it's the skills of your job that you're good at in combination with being a nice person is what makes you great at your job.
Well, Mitch, what a great conversation. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Pleasure.
Yeah.